This Duke football team is 2-0 on the year to get started in the 2022 season and to get started in the Mike Elko era. How good have the Blue Devils been through these first two games? We'll talk about that and a whole lot more coming up today here on Locked On Blue Devils.
Hey, make sure you listen, man, to Locked On Blue Devils with J.J. Jackson. He's awesome, baby.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. So glad to have you here with us on another great episode here of Locked On Blue Devils. On this Wednesday, we're going to spend some time talking about the Duke football team, what has impressed us through the first 2 weeks of the season. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to this podcast for free wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating and review. We'll give 5-star Friday shout-outs on the podcast for folks who leave us those great reviews. That's coming up a little bit later in the week. Also, make sure that you subscribe on YouTube to watch the show daily. We have had over 500 subscribers at this point on YouTube, which we are really grateful for that. If you haven't done so already, follow us on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils, and you can follow me on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_. Today's guest on the program, he's back. My good pal Conor O'Neill from Devils Illustrated joins us on the program here today. Conor, we're talking about a Duke football team that is 2-0 to start the season as we get set for your second appearance here on the podcast. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm caught up with how many games Mike Elko's coached at Duke now. So
there you go.
I don't know if you'll have me on for all 12 or 13 if it gets there, but it's good to be caught up with him at this point, though.
Absolutely. It's been fun to watch football, right? We talked about that right before the season got going, that now we didn't have to have much speculation on what we would see, and now we actually have a product to see. We've seen 2 games for Duke football at this point. So let's talk about the offense, the defense, and some major takeaways at the end of the program here. So offensively, with any football team, I think typically you start at the quarterback position. That was the big question mark going into the year. And from my perspective, I walk away really impressed with what we've seen from Riley Leonard through these first 2 starts of the year.
Yeah, he's had 2 really strong days. With Saturday went, it's kind of forget how good he was early because the offense bogged down in the second quarter, and then the third quarter, he threw a nice ball to Eli Pankel, maybe a little behind him in the end zone, and just kind of a freak play where it goes through Eli's hands, bounces off his helmet, and all of a sudden it's an interception in the end zone, which, those are backbreaking plays, but it's not exactly something Riley did wrong. So, yeah, Riley, it's interesting. Like I've kind of had a long-standing theory that what the perception of a quarterback battle makes everybody think that your quarterback situation is terrible if you have a battle, because you don't have that one guy, that stud who's gonna be your 5th-year player and your 3-year, 4-year starter. But a lot of times those guys that emerge from competitions, like, they've been competing for a month. They're already kind of in game mode. They're ramped up. They're when they're able to kind of carry their competitiveness into the season, they're able to hit the ground running. So I think that's where Riley has come from, where, technically he had a start last year. It was an injury. It was basically a spot start, to use the baseball term, for Gunnar Holmberg when he was hurt. So I think of him as a first-time starter, and he's 2-0 and he's looked great in both starts. I don't think you can ask for much more out of him.
And we're seeing them spread the football to a lot of his different targets. Jalen Calhoun, dynamic as we expected from what we saw a year ago. You mentioned Eli Pankel and the play that he's had, an 81-yard pass reception this past Saturday against Northwestern. And then Jordan Moore transitioning over to wide receiver. What performance we've seen so far from Moore at that wideout spot.
Yeah, I lose track of the calendar at this point of the year, but this is like 3 or 4 weeks of playing quarterback or playing receiver for Jordan Moore. If he's this good and he's making catches like the one he had in the back of the end zone, which I think he got both feet down, that's a catch on Sundays and Mondays as much as it's a catch on Saturdays. That's just an incredible athlete. And it's always fun to know that you're not getting fed lines of kind of bull crap. And not that I had a reason to think that we were, but Coach Elko and the staff made it really clear that like Jordan Moore is such a good athlete that we have to get him on the field. He's going to be in the game plan. If he wins the quarterback battle, he's obviously our starting quarterback. If he doesn't win the quarterback battle, he's not just going to stand on the sideline with a clipboard and only enter the game if Riley gets knocked out. Like in last year, like he was in the Wildcat packages, and everybody knew that he was going to run the ball 90% of the time that he was in the game. Like you couldn't do that with him. So the coaching staff kind of told us and we're upfront about, that kid is going to be involved. He's going to get the ball, and you've seen it. Like he is involved and he gets the ball. He is a legitimate slot receiver, and he's every bit as good as most ACC slot receivers.
Which has been fun to watch. I mean, and credit to Jordan Moore for putting the work in, for developing the way that he has at that wideout spot. That's terrific, and it's something that this offense is going to need more of as they continue throughout the schedule before they jump into ACC competition. That's going to be big for the Blue Devils there. We've seen a running back by committee approach from Duke. I think the offensive line has been a solid unit so far for the Blue Devils as well. Definitely want to make sure we talk about the defense, and we're going to do that here in just a moment on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by BetOnline, your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports information this season. Find all the latest football developments, game matchup news, and podcasts, including all the games taking place in both the NFL and college football. BetOnline is also your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Moving forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, I'm JJ Jackson alongside Conor O'Neill from Devils Illustrated. And Conor, we talked offense. Now let's talk defense. This is a unit that Mike Elko takes pride in, had a really long career as a successful defensive coordinator. And I joked after week one when Duke shut out Temple, that's a really good start defensively to not allow an opponent to put up any points. We knew, obviously, that trend was not going to be able to continue the entire season. But 2 weeks into the year, talk to me about this Duke defense.
Yeah, I had fun after the Temple game. I asked Mike if, like 100, I think Temple had like 172 yards offensively. They pitched the shutout, and I was just kind of like, Mike, isn't that a really high bar to set for your defensive guys? And he's joked with us a lot about how there's this perception that, when a defensive coordinator gets hired as a head coach, they only want their scores to be 17-10 wins. Like the defensive coordinators always want to see those low scoring games. And he's joked about it. He knows that sometimes they're going to need to win games in the 30s and the 40s. So, they cracked a little bit in the second half. I don't think that's too blunt of a thing to point out. Like
Sure.
They gave up some drives. They gave up some chunk plays. They had a lot of difficulty covering Evan Hull out of the backfield. He's an NFL running back, but you can give him a lot of credit, but also say that Duke is going to face other running backs in the ACC that can catch the ball out of the backfield and make things happen. So that's something they need to get shored up and addressed. And the concern there would be also the snap counts. Like they had some really high snap counts, and when the other team runs 100 plays, you're going to get snap counts up in the 90s and 80s. But yeah, Shaka Hayward played 95 snaps, and so they're going to want to take the pressure off those guys, and that's the benefit of timing it with the FCS game coming this weekend. But on the whole, like I'm realizing I'm getting a little negative here. They're really good. And based on what they're coming from, based on what they've got a lot of new guys on that side, but they've also got some guys that were around for last year and some guys in key spots last year that were part of a defense that gave up more yards than anybody in the country. Got so many points. I mean, Louisville scored 62 in that penultimate game last season, and then Miami just kind of waltzed their way to scoring 45 or 47 in that last game. I mean, the defense was atrocious last year. I don't think anybody is going to argue that. And so to see guys like Shaka Hayward, Dorian Mausi, Dwayne Carter, Jamion Franklin, to see them step up and to see them be as good as they've been, you kind of know that, okay, last year might have been more scheme based. Last year might have been just wearing down through the course of the season. These guys have talent if they're put in the right spots, if they've got the right strength and conditioning build up through the summer. Yeah, they can be good football players, and they can really lead a Duke defense that can kind of do some things against, we'll see where Northwestern's offense is at the end of the year, but and we'll see if Duke's defense is able to keep playing the way they've been. But it's a really solid start for a unit that had to come a long way in the last 9 months.
And Conor, I'm really glad you talked about obviously what Duke has done defensively through the first 2 weeks and gave Duke credit to Shaka Hayward and Mosi in the linebacker room. The defensive linemen have certainly been impressive for Duke as well. But I want to commend the secondary because that was a major question mark coming into the season. And the snap counts, I hadn't even thought about it from that perspective. I was simply looking at the fact that on Saturday against Northwestern, Helinski attempts 60 passes in that football game. Last year, the most he ever attempted was 39 against Nebraska. So a major jump even in what he's typically been asked to do in his college career. 60 passes defended. That takes some energy and some effort out there. And the secondary kept getting after it.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon Johnson was on the team last year. I think he played less than 100 snaps. Chandler Rivers is a freshman who comes in. Darius Joyner is a sixth-year college guy, but he's never played P5 football. He was at Jacksonville State, and he was at Western Illinois for a year. Jalen Stinson is kind of the one guy back there who played a lot for Duke last year, and he's the one that pops the ball out from Hall at the goal line to really preserve the win. That secondary has come a long way. They've come a long way since the spring. I mean, there was a lot of mixing and matching back there. We had a parameter of the open practices was that we couldn't report on depth chart news and kind of movement. And, some positions, like you could tell, we couldn't say that Riley Leonard was running with the first team for the end of camp. Some other positions, like the secondary, even if I wanted to, I couldn't tell you who was a first teamer and who was a second teamer because they were mixing and matching and plugging so many different combinations.
Right.
It was just impossible to tell who your guys were. So they've really gelled that group together. It's a lot of credit to not only Coach Elko and Rob Smith, the defensive coordinator, but Lyle Hemphill, the safeties coach who came over from Wake Forest. Ishmael, I'll probably butcher the pronunciation of this, and I'm sorry for that. Aristide is the cornerbacks coach. It's really interesting to watch those two position coaches because Lyle, I've covered Lyle at Wake. Lyle is very underspoken. He's more of a, when he talks, it's not going to be crushing you. It's not going to be yelling at you and getting in your face. It's going to be kind of like, hey, that was a misassignment. What were you seeing? And if you tell him the wrong thing, it's going to be, well, that's wrong. And this is why it's wrong. And this is a teachable moment. Ish is kind of the opposite. Ish throughout fall camp was kind of loud, I would say he's one of the 3 loudest coaches on Duke's practice fields. He would let players know when they did well and when they didn't do well. So it's interesting to see the balance of that. It's interesting to see the secondary come together as they have. I think Darius Joyner is a really good leader. It's a shame that Duke only has him for the 1 year, but you need guys like that when you're building a program to kind of set the foundation and teach the younger guys how to be that type of player when they're older. So I think he deserves a lot of credit there. I think Jalen Stinson is coming along as a football player. Like he is, I mean, that was just such a heady play at the goal line. It might look like a fluke, but it's right place, it's right time. It's maximum effort on the 100th play of the game. He was one of the guys that was above 90 for his snap count. So that's just such an encouraging thing to see. Yeah, you're on it with praising the secondary. I mean, those guys, I mean, it's a lot of new guys. It's a lot of guys that were around last year and didn't play much, and they've been really good so far.
It's just been fun to watch. It's a fun unit, and we'll see some success, I'm sure, on Saturday because North Carolina A&T is your next opponent. Then you jump back into Power 5 competition, taking on a very surprising 2-0 team in Kansas. And we'll see what else can happen for Duke as they jump in to ACC play. Let's wrap up our conversation here in just a moment on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Make sure that your second listen of the day is Locked On ACC. You can get more on the Atlantic Coast Conference by making Locked On ACC your second listen every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and also on YouTube, as host Candace Cooper and the local experts like myself of Locked On take you across the conference in 30 minutes. Make sure that you make Locked On ACC your second listen. Locked On ACC, available wherever you get your podcasts. As we start to wind down here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, I'm JJ Jackson alongside Conor O'Neill from Devils Illustrated. Conor, if you will, devilsillustrated.com. People put that into their search engines. What can they expect to find at your website?
Yeah, you can pop open the lead story from yesterday's press conferences from Mike Elko talking about how, the cliche goes in football. You're never as good as it appears when you win. You're never as bad as it appears when you lose. And obviously the former applies to Duke at this point, 2-0. There's a balance there. And that's what I wrote about. It's just a balance between these guys have been through some things. It's not like they were winless last year, but they didn't experience much success. You want them to be happy at 2-0, but you also don't want them to get complacent. You want them to realize, like, we have to stay focused. We can't come off of this big road win against a Big Ten team and come lay an egg against an in-state FCS opponent. So you'll find that story. You'll find 2 stories off of the game on Saturday. I wrote a subscriber-only story that really lays out how every element of Duke's acronym, that grind, GRIND, was on full display. I went back and read and listened to the introduction press conference from Mike Elko back in December to fully define what the vision was then and how it applied throughout the game against Northwestern. So it's really good stuff. I'm not the best at selling myself, but I think it's good coverage, and I think Duke fans would appreciate it. And I think Bo appreciates it. He's getting a little antsy behind me.
Yeah, that's why folks need to watch us on YouTube so they can see your dog Bo pop up every now and again here on the program. He's definitely a big fan of your work. I am as well. Again, make sure that you join the Devils Illustrated community. Very grateful when Conor O'Neill takes time to join us. And I'm glad you pointed out what Elko said after the first 2 weeks of the season, because that's kind of how I wanted to wrap up our conversation, right? Duke is 2-0 on the year, yet there are still certain things that this football team needs to address and be aware of. There are also 0-2 teams across college football right now that you want to literally hit the panic button every single day and moment, but need to understand there are also things that are a little bit better about your football team than you might want to initially admit. So Duke being on the 2-0 side of things, this football team still work to be done. And it is, I guess, a positive thing that going into the third week of the season, you are playing an opponent in North Carolina A&T that you are such a mighty favorite again. Now's where effort, motivation, everything comes into factor to see if Duke can use this as a learning experience and an opportunity to get some guys some reps.
Yeah, this is one where I think you look at it, you never want to play things too far ahead in advance, but I think Duke's staff looks at this game and says, let's get off to another hot start, right? I mean, 24-0 against Temple and 21-0 against Northwestern. And now you're playing a team that, at least theoretically, like with 20 some fewer scholarships, is not going to be on their level later in the game. So you want another hot start, and then you want to be able to work in your guys. You want to be able to throw some depth guys in there, throw some 2s and 3s out there, and see if those guys can be counted on for more snaps. I'm going to write something here in the next day or two about the defensive snap counts, and Mike had a really good and insightful answer when I asked about that, and he just kind of laid out how it was a weird game, and they obviously didn't want Shaka Hayward out there for 90 some snaps. They didn't want Mausi out there for as many snaps, but it was just something that played out over the course of the game. You certainly don't want that to play out against A&T. I think Duke's coaches can kind of get their attention with also pointing out, and Mike brought this up, I had actually forgotten it. Last year, A&T took the opening drive of the game against Duke and went 20 plays and marched down the field for a touchdown drive. You can't have that happen. Like you can't be you can't be where your program wants to be if you're letting FCS teams do that to you. So getting off to a hot start, playing a lot of guys, and then, staying healthy, all the normal things that come. Don't get sloppy with turnovers. Make sure you're tackling. Like that was another big thing. Duke had, according to Pro Football Focus, it was 6 missed tackles in 59 snaps against Temple.
Wow.
And that number jumped up to 15 missed tackles in 100 snaps against Northwestern. So you're going to want to clean up the tackling. Obviously, the level of opponent increased, so you should be better tackling in this game. And that'll be really important for Kansas because it's, what is it, like the Champions Classic of the gridiron?
Exactly.
Get together in football. So
exactly.
Duke will have to be better tackling moving into that game. That's a big thing to keep an eye on this week.
Duke football getting set to take on North Carolina A&T on Saturday from inside Wallace Wade Stadium. Make sure that you are following Conor O'Neill on Twitter at Conor O'Neill _DI, and also go to devilsillustrated.com for all of his amazing Duke football coverage. Basketball season right around the corner, and we are going to have plentiful amounts of conversation with Conor in the days and weeks to come. Thank you so much for the time today. We'll be sure to do this again sometime soon, okay?
Thanks, JJ, and thanks for the reminder the basketball season's coming up. I get into this rhythm. I get into this rhythm with football season, and then the basketball just approaches like a ship in the night and crushes me every year.
That is the state in which we live, the state of North Carolina loving their hoops. So, Conor, be well, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, JJ.
That's Conor O'Neill from Devils Illustrated, and he's joining us on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Thank you so much for your support. As always, be sure you follow us on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils. Follow me on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_. That's going to do it for another episode of the program. Again, make sure that you subscribe on YouTube as well to watch the show daily. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.